Hello, I'm here with David Ward on the occasion of his exhibition Slow Time. David, when we first met to talk about this exhibition, you had a very particular idea about the works that you wanted to gather together for this exhibition. Can you tell us something about that?
I had realised that there were groups of work that I'd made over a considerable period of time that were very close to my heart and felt very central to me, to my work as a whole. But for all sorts of different reasons through the passage of time and life, these works had never been seen outside the studio in a gallery exhibition, and they'd never been seen, therefore, related to each other. I think probably the fact that I'd moved my studio prior to that realisation was important to that understanding of the works. Because I'd been re-archiving work, reviewing work, looking at sometimes at works that I hadn't seen for many years, as I moved the studio from one place to another. And that, I think, is really what began our conversation
and our journey
to this moment. Yes,
absolutely. And so what decisions did you make after that initial conversation?
Through bringing works out in the studio, which are often quite modest in scale around us in the gallery, I gradually began to see that there were certain interests. Well, I knew them to be there, but I began to see that a number of interests were clearly visible, recurring over long periods of time, sometimes submerging and then re-emerging maybe 5 years, 10 years later, and that perhaps this was the basis for an exhibition that would reveal certain continuities that have persisted over, well, some 40 years since I first went to art school.
You settled on the title Slow Time. I wonder what lies behind the decision to have a title of that.
Well, Slow Time comes from the opening lines of a Keats poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn. And in this poem, Keats describes the Grecian vessel, this beautiful urn, as something which really has remained unchanged. While around it, the world has changed. And he actually describes this object as a foster child of silence and slow time. And it reminded me of something that Rilke said, which was that what distinguishes art objects from other objects in the world, Rilke says, is that they are patient objects. And it seemed to me there was something chimed between Keats's idea of slow time in relation to the persistence of an art object in the world while the world changes, and Rilke's idea of an art object being patient and time passing around the object in that sense. And since this had become an exhibition of works that hadn't been seen outside a studio context, essentially, before, it seemed appropriate in that sense.
And did reveal that sense of consistency. During the course of this exhibition, we're going to have a seminar on the question of judgment, and you're taking part. You, more than anyone I can think of, is an artist who deals in a very pure form of, or appears to deal in a very pure form of aesthetic judgment, and yet much of the work in this exhibition depends on chance, the unexpected, on accident. I wondered how you square this very precise, clear thinking about making judgments with encouraging, if you like, the accidental to enter.
I studied painting, not very far from this gallery at Winchester School of Art, in the late 60s and early 1970s. And I've always felt that, in my experience, painting having been the first, as it were, the first mode of experiencing the visual world vividly for me, that painting has persisted over the years since, even though through those years I've worked in many different media, including photography and performance and film and sound and other media. Painting somehow seems to be behind it all. And something I suppose that I remember certainly as a painting student was a tendency to actually want to control the form of the painting to a high degree. And often, as my experience led me to realize, sometimes at least, to a degree that, as it were, took the life out of the painting. And parallel with that, recognition about at least my sort of early approach to making work. Like many of my contemporaries, I recognized a very strong, stimulating interest in, amongst many others, most famously, John Cage's interest in chance and its relationship to other cultures and philosophies than Western European ones. It's probably something bumps together for me between those two ways of apprehending or being in the world. And it has, as you say, led me to frequently bringing about processes within, say, photographic processing, where I step completely out of controlling the medium, and the work, so to speak, makes itself once I've started the process off by, for instance, developing a photograph but leaving it not fixed for a considerable period of time, so that the chemistry in the photograph would act without my intervention on the final work.
Does that require you to create an enormous number of things and destroy a lot, or is it more to do with the way in which they're created, the means by which they're created?
I don't think I've tended to do the former, to produce extremely large quantities of things that I've then edited out.
That's the impression I get. Of course.
Many of the groupings that you see around us are fairly complete. There are other works in each of these bodies of works, by and large, that aren't here, but that's not because they've been discarded, it's simply because of the balance of the exhibition. But an example that might be of this relationship between control and wanting to be alert to those things that are slightly beyond one's control would be in the drawings that I've titled Blind Drawings, Life Drawings. These are essentially life drawings made during a performance in which you could only become a member of the audience of this performance if you were willing to draw the performance. This was a performance by an artist, Anthony Howell, at Riverside Studios in the mid-1980s. And as an audience member, I therefore drew the performance. But having not drawn from life since being an art student, I knew that I didn't want to, as it were, fall back into habits of drawing the figure from a decade or more earlier. And I devised a way of drawing with old-fashioned typing carbon paper and an exhausted biro with no ink in it, so that the carbon paper lay on top of the drawing paper, upside down, concealing the drawing paper. And I drew on the carbon paper with this point, therefore unable to actually see the drawing that I was making until the action changed and I took off the top sheet and moved on to a new sheet of paper. And I was very surprised by what emerged out of that process of looking at the subject, not looking at the paper, and simply this relationship between the eye, the moving figures of the performance, and the moving hand on the drawing paper.
And that's really fascinating, because in many ways it's a key to much of the exhibition, because it's about line and it's the sensitivity of the line. And you think that those line drawings are about the absolute sensuousness of the line, but of course the method that you used didn't allow any variation, tonal variation or anything to do. It was only the line itself, not the harshness or the lightness of touch or whatever. It was just, It was almost a mechanical process you were using, and yet that sensitivity in the line is quite clear.
It also, I think, has a relationship to the question of time and for me, where the emergence of different manifestations of time throughout the exhibition. You know, there is, in those drawings, there is the actual finite lived through time of the point moving across the paper, And sometimes that would be a very brief moment, some seconds before a still figure moved, and I would move on to another drawing. But there's also the duration of the performance, of drawing for maybe an entire hour. In that sense, a group of drawings relate to that slightly larger span of time. But I think probably there is a sense in which the serpentine line, or the arabesque, that I think Hogarth writes about very brilliantly in his analysis of beauty, treatise on the analysis of beauty. The serpentine line, I think, has about it a certain animation which suggests that the line itself is from a sequence of passing time. It may be a still image now, but it retains a certain animation of something vivid.
Gathering this group of work together, there is an enormous sense of consistency of purpose and of vision running through it all. It's an overwhelming feeling in amongst all this. You can't have planned that all out at the beginning.
I think the continuities are more evident looking back across a span of time like this than they were at any point.
I can think of quite a lot of artists who would look back in this way and find themselves unrecognisable in terms of the development.
Yes.
It's an interesting one, but one of the things that does come out of it quite clearly is that you work very clearly in series, and the series are quite distinct from one another.
The notion of the series, or an extended group of works, not necessarily made strictly as a series, but certainly as a number of closely related works, attracts me because it contains within it the possibility of relating what might be in the world individual objects, but of relating them out to others. And in that sense, a very recent group of works in the exhibition, made with pastel on paper, simply bringing two colours together along one edge. There's definitely a chromatic activity to the eye, I think, for me, as I move across the 8 panels, which is a different experience obviously to the one that I have when I'm concentrating on one of those panels in particular. And that sequential experience, which I think is quite, for me, in the work of other artists, where I see perhaps a series of works. In Monet, for example, the Rouen Cathedral paintings, or the so-called haystacks. You know, these are works which I think stimulate something in the eye between a group in a way which is, as it were, in addition to the wonders that those particular paintings of his have.
Interestingly, it clearly speaks to the public as well, because I remember that the exhibition of the series that was shown at the Monet series shown at the Royal Academy was thought before it went out to the public as being a little esoteric. It wasn't exactly a Monet show so much as a concentration on a very particular kind of activity. I think it's one of the most popular shows they've ever done, because people understood the activity that the artist was engaged in and the reason why, which is fascinating.
Yes. I mean, it is a feature, I suppose, of that emerges. I think it's a pre-modern way of working, actually, but it certainly becomes a very central modernist way of working, which is the notion of sometimes styled as repetition with variation. You know, the inventiveness that might be possible with very slender means. Just how many possibilities and visual inventions might be possible with very few elementary parts.
I still want to kind of explore a little bit this idea of the relationship or the consistency of things, because you just said yourself it's quite clear to see why those blind life drawings would relate to these line drawings here, where an image, a line, essentially, has been etched with some difficulty, I imagine, onto sheets of mirror, and the relationship between the line and the circumstances under which it produced and the sensitivity of the line itself is not unrelated.
Yes.
But as you've just said, there's a whole series related to pairs of colours where there's no line at all, and yet the sensitivity and sensibility of them is the relationship, I think. Do you think that's fair?
Yes, I do. The works with pastel that we were talking about a moment ago are very engaging for me in relation to the colour activity, but they're also very engaging to me in the making of them, in their surfaceness. There's something when you get up to those, I'm looking across at them here, when you get close to these pastel paper surfaces, really the pigmentation is extremely dusty, suede-like, I think, and quite friable. And that softness of surface, I think, maybe leads us into another dimension of what you're suggesting that are certain continuities, and that is to do with the nature of surfaces and the sensitive nature of certain surfaces. And so, in that regard, I would, in the gallery beyond the one we're speaking in, we've installed a suite of photographic works that I made of Rodin's The Age of Bronze at Leeds City Art Galleries. And very close to those are a series of the photographic works in which really it was the chemistry of the photographic process started off by me that continued to make photographic surfaces that look very much like night skies, but that are, again, there's something very attractive to me about the photosensitivity, as we call it, of conventional photographic materials. But beyond that is one of the film works that we selected for the exhibition of the surface of what is actually the Orinoco River undulating in the frame of the camera. And in a sense, there are some of these realizations are very new to me since we've brought these works together in the gallery and literally in the last week. But it occurred to me very clearly when we did that the Rodin sculpture, which spent much of its lifetime outside in a Yorkshire garden, is beautifully streaked and patinated by rain. That really distinguishes it radically and very dramatically from what I've called the proper polish of the conventional museum cast, which is a highly polished, deep brown black, very beautiful, and very different to the green patina of the Leeds cast. It's all to do with being drenched with water in the Yorkshire countryside. But just beyond that, the photographic works that appear to be night skies were all, of course, that photographic process is entirely to do with liquids and immersion and being drenched. And as is, of course, the clear nature of the Orinoco River surface film. And so that watery relation between three very different
Well, you've just made that fascinating, which is visible here to anyone who sees, that fantastic relationship between three things, almost like consequences in a sense. You know, the relationship between them is very, very important. And I think a key to this exhibition is that is the postcards. Over the years, you've collected and gathered postcards, and you've made interesting juxtapositions between them, just as found objects almost, things that you've collected and gathered over the years. And I think by watching the way in which you've put those postcards, these found objects, together gives a great indication of a working method that has perhaps brought this exhibition together.
Well, I'm glad you've kind of reminded me about the postcards again, because I'm not a collector of postcards in the strict sense of the word. I don't go rummaging in markets and car boot sales looking for particular subjects. But perhaps again, it's a litmus test for some of the continuities of things that hold my attention through life. Is that over many years of gradual gatherings together, and of course the keeping of postcards sent by friends and family, I realised that there were categories of iconography, if you like, that I'd accumulated. The pleasure began to come out of me relating one image to another, to another, to another, in a way that isn't necessarily generic. It isn't necessarily to do with 6 postcards of the same type of subject. It might be 6 postcards of completely different objects. A flower, a bridge, an architectural interior, a trumpet, for example, but that have, at least for me, some sort of cohesion when they're brought together. And if it doesn't sound too self-conscious, I do see them as being something like image poems, in the sense of bringing very vivid but condensed iconographies together in a short span.
It's almost a key to your aesthetic throughout the exhibition. I imagine that people will look at this and make other connections across the various different groups of works, and that's something presumably you would encourage.
Completely. I do think, quite simply, that artworks are completed by the viewer, always, and that their being seen is in the world, is what they're made for. And in that sense, I suppose there is a sense in which the end of Keats's poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn, is actually very moving, in that Keats looks ahead, having, as it were, meditated on the long history of this beautiful object in the world, unchanged and unchanging while the world changes around it. He then looks ahead to this object carrying on in the world, and he actually envisages it persisting beyond his own generation. And I think that sets a proper sense of time around any work in the world, that might have preceded us and stayed with us during our lifetimes, and then possibly had the opportunity to carry on beyond us.
So in terms of making these links across the works, and particularly thinking about surface, there is the new work in the project room which is related to the vaults of King's College.
The work you're talking about is actually the most recent work in the exhibition, and was in a sense only completed this week as we installed it in the gallery. The film is made in 2 parts, so that simultaneously the viewer sees on an upper screen one space in King's College Chapel in Cambridge, and that space is up below the roof on top of the ceiling of the chapel, literally standing and looking at the top of the ceiling, the stone ceiling of the chapel. The lower screen that the viewer sees at the same time is the view that would be familiar to a visitor to King's College Chapel, which is looking up at the famously beautiful stone fan vaults of the ceiling. And so we see both sides of the same surface at the same time. And it's worth remembering that in places the stone fan vaults are no more than 2 inches thick, and so this is very much a shell, and the attempt in the film is to view both sides of that shell-like surface at the same time. The attraction or interest in that ceiling began when I was an artist in residence at King's in the early 1990s, and it's only this year, some over 15, 16 years or so later, that I've actually been able to complete the work itself. And it does, in fact, relate, I think, surprisingly. I looked back at the introduction to Hogarth's analysis of beauty and found there he encourages artists to look at objects in the world not only as surfaces seen, as it were, from the outside, but he suggests imagining those surfaces as, he actually says, for example, scooped out to a shell-like surface, suggesting that if the better the understanding of the object from the inside, then the better the understanding of the object from the outside. It's a remarkable piece of imaginative writing about how we might look at the world, and suggesting that we look in order to understand what we see.
Well, David, it's a very beautiful exhibition. I think it's a very distilled exhibition. I described it to you a few days ago as a very classical exhibition, by which I think I mean that it's timeless, and we're very grateful for that, so thank you very much.
Thank you, Stephen.